Have you ever wondered what people living in Russia think right now? We're reading about the protests, but do many other Russians think that Vladimir Putin is doing a good thing, a right thing? Are they somehow feeling threatened by Ukraine? Is there a side of the story we're not getting here in the West? We're going to separate fact from fiction today. We're going to do our best to do that. And right now, aside from China, North Korea, countries like that, Iran, in many ways, the rest of the world, the bulk of the rest of the world is really tightening the screws on Russia and Putin. I mean, Germany, which is very reticent to get involved militarily because of its past history, sending arms to help. And then Switzerland also not only being neutral, freezing assets in all of the banks where there's so much Russian money, and the World Cup for soccer, football, the biggest world sporting event, saying Russia cannot participate in 2022. Just coming from different angles, Apple Pay saying it's no longer going to work in Russia. Elon Musk saying, okay, I'm going to open satellites for communication with Ukraine and so on. It seems as if everyone is standing up to evil Putin in this evil invasion of Russia. I got an email the other day, a Facebook message from a dear brother in Russia saying, hey, I'm praying for everyone involved. I have love for everyone involved, but you're getting the story really wrong. So I'm gonna sort that out with one of our missionaries, Leanne Peterson. She is an American who has lived in Ukraine for the last 18 years. She'd be there right now if not for flights not going in. She's been serving there, serving orphans, helping the churches, together with another American missionary grad from our school that we were able to help send out. The other is married to a Ukrainian pastor, and she's in touch with many believers in Russia, in Ukraine. And I said, Leanne, hey, could you come on and give us a perspective of someone who's lived there? You know the reporting of the West. You know what happens in Russia. So good to have Leanne with us. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, it's good to be on.
Well,
Thank you.
you're very welcome. Okay, so Leanne, how did you end up in Ukraine in the first place? Let's start there and just personalize this a little bit.
Well, I ended up in Ukraine because, I had a desire to be a missionary for many years, and I thought I was going to Africa. But then when I went to fire school and did my internship, there was an opportunity to go to Ukraine. And at the end of my first week in Ukraine, it was very clear to me that the Holy Spirit asked me to stay and serve the Ukrainian people. And that is how I got there. I would never have picked it on my own, but God knew best.
Mm. So what were some of the obstacles culturally that you ran into, things either ethically, spiritually, or just culturally that you found very different?
There's such a spirit of hopelessness in Ukraine, especially at that time, because coming out of communism, there isn't, that self-worth, that value that so many people have. We didn't see that. And then that hopelessness spread a lot of depression, and alcoholism and drug addiction was so much more rampant there, than I had ever seen here in America. And culturally, it was getting people to start standing up for their own beliefs back 18 years ago. They just did much of what they were told to do. But now, in the last 10 years, we can see that Ukrainians are not afraid to stand up for their rights anymore and to say we are valuable as citizens, and, we are worthy to be honored and live by the laws of our land and not be lied to.
Mm. So the can-do spirit in America, anything's possible, make your dreams come true, that's not really found in countries under communism, Marxism. There is that oppression, that hopelessness that you mentioned. And it is interesting to see changes come as the cloud starts to lift. What about spiritually? Is there a lot of religious tradition there? Is there a lot of vibrant faith? What did you run into?
The believers who are, Christians, they were definitely just very on fire for the Lord, because being persecuted for so many years really gave them such a deep hunger and closeness to God that was, amazing to see. Also in that, a big difference, because, when they had faith for something, it wasn't that they questioned it, but they just stood on that faith because they knew that God is the only answer that they have. And culturally, in general, most Ukrainians would say they are Orthodox Christians, but it doesn't necessarily impact their lives in any way other than some of the holidays they will go to the church to get things blessed by the priest or things like that. But yeah, the charismatic, evangelical, Baptist Christians, the ones we've known, I mean, their faith is very real to them, is what I would say.
Yeah, well, that would make sense. I remember Richard Wurmbrand saying that when the Iron Curtain fell in Romania, all these Christians from the West were flooding in. They were going to teach the Romanian church. And he said, you think someone that was in chains for 20 years and never denied Jesus might have something to teach the West? So,
Right.
so how did you end up working with orphans?
It was just the church that we ended up working with there. There was a group of people that was already doing work with orphans. Ukraine has a large orphan problem. There was over, 200,000 orphans in the system at that time when I moved there. So that just became, something God put on our heart. And then we have a church there. It's been there 8.5 years, Church of Truth and True Hope organization. And the church was started to really reach the orphans because they're still stereotyped and mistreated, by many others and never felt comfortable going to some other churches. So we wanted to make a place where they felt they had a family and that they were at home and they were not going to be treated any differently than anyone else.
So after 18 years now, you've seen many of them grow up and get on with life. Are you seeing transformation?
Yes, we do see lots of transformation. We have good stories and we have bad stories.
Of course.
That's how it goes sometimes. But, we have kids who were on drugs and God has miraculously set them completely free overnight, waking up the next morning, zero drug addiction, zero desire to smoke or to drink, all of it broken off of their lives overnight. And, some of our ministers they grew up in the orphanages and they remember us from when they were 10 years old and they're in their late 20s now and they come alongside of us and help us with our ministry. And it's just, it's great to see what God is doing in these lives.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. I just wanted to get the personal background and paint a little bit of a picture there. So we interacted via email about these points, but I'd like to do it on the air now. And again, you always have to ask, okay, am I getting accurate news? Right. And often in America, if I see the same things being reported in a very liberal left-wing website and a very right-wing conservative website, and websites in between, and they're all saying the same thing, that tends to give me a bit more confidence that things are accurate than if I'm seeing it in world news, it's saying the same thing in Israel, saying the same thing in England and a few others. Like, okay, this could really be, the same story here being reported, because otherwise you just don't know how much bias there is. So here's a Christian brother in Russia, and he was responding to the show last week where I had Fred Merkert on with me. He's ministered in 150 nations, used to be the international director for Youth with a Mission, and he was bringing some of his perspective. And I asked, is some of Putin's desire some type of megalomaniac-driven desire to reconstitute the former Soviet Union, something like this? So he wrote to me, first, I'd like to say that Putin is not pursuing the reestablishment of the Soviet Union. These are not the sentiments in Russia at all. When asked many times about it, he always said no. And moreover, it's not even feasible since ex-Soviet countries are already different economically and in their mindset. All Putin wants is good relationships with them economically and militarily, totally respecting their independence. I wouldn't say his actions are megalomania-driven either. He very well knows from his own experience what terroristic threat to the nation is. So his foreign policy is simply national defense-oriented. So what's your take on that?
I mean, when Ukraine first started just making steps to try and have better economic relations with Europe, not saying that we didn't want to still have economic relations with Russia, even at that moment, it was already like, no, like they were interfering with our politics. That's when some of those revolutions started happening. That's when some of the fighting started happening, because it was just like, no, absolutely cannot be Western thinking in any way, because that's too much of a threat. So it's, they still just want to be the ones controlling Ukraine. That's what it's always been for us, is if we make any step away from their control, then they do everything they can to stop us.
And so this is something that you have seen then for 18 years, and that the man or woman on the street would confirm in terms of this is the reality in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They all would say that if we don't have a Kremlin-backed authority, then they're going to not be okay with that. They're not going to just let it slide.
Right. Again, that's been my understanding, and just want to confirm from within your borders there. And the brother
Hmm.
who wrote with a great heart, great spirit, humble, loving Russia, loving the people of Ukraine, and not writing to correct me, but just saying, hey, there's another perspective here. So I wanted to challenge that perspective and said perhaps that's what you're being told within Russia, but the rest of the world and the people of Ukraine don't see it like that either. So he did agree that Russia does not want Ukraine to come into NATO, because that would be saying, okay, all the neighboring countries or virtually all the neighboring countries are in NATO, and that would be threatening to Putin. Does Putin have any reason to feel threatened from the neighboring countries?
I mean, if we were able to be more democratic and more part of the European Union, I don't. We have no ill will against Russia. Most Ukrainians have family in Russia, so it's not like we want to turn on our brothers and sisters and hurt them, but we want still just the ability to live with what is best for our country in Ukraine, and that it's no, I don't think he would have. We wouldn't be a threat to Russia. They're way bigger and way stronger than Ukraine is. We know that.
And what's Ukraine's current situation with nuclear weapons? Were those all turned over years back in a peace treaty?
Yes, when Ukraine became a free nation, that was one of the agreements. We had to surrender all of our nuclear weapons.
Right. So the idea then that if Ukraine came into NATO, that there would be nuclear weapons right next to Russia, it wouldn't be Ukraine's. It would have to be somebody else's then,
Right.
theoretically. Got it.
Yes, that's
Got it.
correct.
All right. We come back. I want to go through a few more of these points, but then I want you to paint a picture for me, as best as you know it, to what life is like right now for the people in Ukraine. In fact, we're going to start there. What is the level of suffering? What else can be done aside from praying, and how America, the rest of the world, look to Ukraine right now? Does it feel as if we've abandoned them in the midst of a real crisis from what appears to be a tyrannical move from Russia with all of its power? Thanks, friends, for joining us. Those watching may notice on my studio desk a copy of The Silencing of the Lambs just came in. And for all who pre-ordered the signed numbers copies, sign them all. We're getting them right out to you. We did this already today. Our team jumped right on it. We've got videos about this on Facebook and on Instagram. And tomorrow, the book goes live. So if you have pre-ordered somewhere the audio book or the ebook, you'll have those waiting for you. So check it out, Silencing Lambs. Oh, tomorrow, I'll let you know how you can overcome this attempt to silence us, silence our voices. Okay, I want to go back to our focus on Ukraine right now with Leanne Peterson, who has served as a Fire International ministry there for 18 years and really looks at Ukraine as her home. How bad are things nationally right now for the Ukrainian people? Is it just key cities, or is the whole nation feeling the power of this invasion?
The entire nation is feeling the power of this invasion. I mean, just as we speak right now, I was getting messages from my home city. It's the first night we've had air raid sirens going off there. So they're asking to pray for the safety of Kryvyi Rog. But right, Kiev is definitely affected. In the east, there's definitely some cities affected. In the south, there is a lot of fighting going on. And that first morning, I mean, in my city too, there was military bases bombed everywhere. We had a bombing that morning as well, just outside of our city. So, I mean, the pressure is really intense right now, and that is especially what is hard for our believers and our pastors and our leaders, because so many are fleeing. I mean, there was, one day there was no food at the grocery store, but now there's food back on the shelves again, thankfully. But there's no cash. The gas is running low. So they're worried about their supplies. And like for my personal life and my church, many of us have young families there, and there's a lot of young kids, and that's where they're struggling is, do we try and leave? Do we try and escape, or do we stay? And I mean, right now, if your family was to leave, the men have to stay behind, because all men of fighting age are not allowed to leave Ukraine. So it'd be sending women and children to the West, trying to get them out into Europe. And so, I mean, it's definitely, you can just, talking with all of my friends, and my church, I just see they are standing in faith, but you can tell that there is a toll, there is a price being paid, and it's wearing them down a bit, but they're doing the best they can. Our church is there. We have tons of supplies ready. We've already housed refugees from the east. We've housed refugees from Kiev. and we're just there ready to help in any way that we can.
And you were booking your tickets to fly back knowing that war was potentially imminent. Why was that?
Well, I mean, my life is invested there. These are my people now. God has given this heart, a heart for this nation, and that's so many people here keep telling me they're so happy that I'm here and I'm safe, and I'm like, yes, I appreciate that, but my heart is there, and if there is any way I could be helping my Ukrainians, that's the place where I would rather be. But
Yeah.
God has stopped me for now, so
Uh,
I'm here in
yeah,
America.
well, I'm glad you're safe, but I'm eager with you to see you back there, with your spiritual family and what has
Yeah.
been home for you these last 18 years. And you're an American and at heart Ukrainian as well by identification
Yes.
with the people. How do you feel about what America's done and not done so far?
I appreciate the support. Things being lit up with blue and yellow, and Ukrainians, they feel that. They feel the prayers. I mean, definitely, we have so many testimonies about rockets that have landed that haven't exploded. We know people are praying, and that's why we see things. But at the same time, they say, "Can you do anything more?" Because we obviously cannot hold this off forever on our own. And just recently, Biden offered our President Zelensky a ticket out, and he said, "No, I don't need a ticket. What I need is help and ammunition."
Yeah.
He's staying right there in the middle of the fight. He's not leaving Kiev, and yeah, we need more physical help. That's for sure.
Yeah, and that probably is the single line that has been the most repeated. I don't need a ride, I need ammo. And I'm not
Yeah,
fleeing, I'm staying and fighting. And obviously the world has now taken note of this man that was a comedian, Jewish comedian that
right.
ends up
Yeah,
unexpectedly the president, now is becoming a international hero. And the people of
yeah,
Ukraine holding off Russia this long has been a surprise to many as well. So let me get
yeah.
back to this perspective from Russia. This dear brother writes, since Ukraine has been heavily pumped with arms for the last few months by US and NATO, Putin's goal with the recent intrusion is to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Otherwise, there's a real threat to Russia's very existence. The targets of Russian troops in Ukraine now are exclusively military facilities and disarming nationalistic groups with strong Nazi ideology, which have been tormenting Ukraine, killing people, and committing various kinds of atrocities with impunity since 2014, the Odessa massacre being one of them. When Ukraine government was forcibly taken over with their strong support, backed by US and European governments. In fact, when that happened, the Republic of Crimea in 2014 didn't want the nationalists to rule over it. That's why it decided to vote for joining Russia, which it did with Russian troops protecting the citizens from nationalists while the voting was taking place. There's a whole lot in there. It seems quite outrageous to me. What's your take?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that just sounds like the Russian propaganda machine doing its job, helping Russians believe these lies. Because in Crimea, for instance, when all the information we saw about that vote to become part of Russia was already, all the ballots were pre-marked. Yes, we have many people who told us they went to vote and it didn't matter because the vote was already done for them. And that is why after Crimea was annexed, over 2 million citizens left Crimea to come to mainland Ukraine because they did not want to be part of Russia. Sure, there were some Russians there that would have Russian ties, but I can't say it's the majority of Crimea that wanted to become part of Russia. And denazifying Ukraine, I mean, he must be referring to the fact that people stood up for their rights and protested illegal elections or those types of things. But that's just people standing up for what they believe in. That's not Nazism. That's saying we have rights as citizens not to be lied to and not to, we have a right to vote and for our vote to count for something and not just be bought. So
Yeah, and so you have neo-Nazi groups or outright Nazi groups in Ukraine like you do in America. From my understanding, these are marginal and marginalized groups. And if the country is so heavily Nazified, why on earth did it elect Zelensky, a Jewish man, as president? I mean, this is completely unprecedented. So if you take this whole denazify thing, and that's been one of the greatest outrage. I've been reading reports from Israel and stuff like that word is being used because it's obviously such a dirty word in Russia because of the war that ended up between Germany and Russia in World War II, so costly between them. But is there this hyper nationalism that is actually Nazi-oriented, that's tremendously influential in Ukraine, and that has Zelensky in its back pocket?
No, I can't see any evidence of that happening. The only thing, that this war, which started in 2014, has happened is that it's brought more unity to Ukrainians. They value their country and their nationality more, and they love their country more than they ever have. And they realize they want to be farther away from Russia and its values. That's the only thing that has happened. And that, they're still loving of other countries and loving of other people. It's not that they're being exclusive from anyone else. And yeah, electing Zelensky, that was the highest voter turnout they'd ever had, and he won by over 70% of the vote. So, I mean, he was the chosen people of the Ukrainian people overwhelmingly.
Did you know of him before this as a foul-mouthed comedian playing a Jewish teacher on TV? Were you aware of who he was?
Yes, and he's also from my home city, so I do know about him and his comedy. I had seen, some clips here and there of things that he had done. I had known who he was, yes.
So when he said he was running for president, did people take it seriously?
Because he made this TV show, and in the TV show he showed what he would basically do as president. It was kind of his platform, basically, with humor in it. But so people had already been watching this and loving it and being like, we need a president like that, one who will stop corruption and one who will work on the roads and do all these things. And so when he said he was running, I think, no, people thought, okay, he's serious, because he just kind of told us what he wants to do in this TV show.
And why do you think he won when the ultimate election came after runoffs or whatever first came? Why did he get 70% of the vote? What was it positive about him or negative about the others?
Well, negative about the others was Ukrainians are sick of corruption. And so since there was so much in his speech about anti-corruption, I think that was, very attractive to most Ukrainians. And they were hoping that since this guy was not a politician, maybe he could do things that other presidents had not done for us. And I would have to say he has done a lot. Like, the status of the roads in the last 2 years in Ukraine are unbelievable. I mean, he has redone all of the major highways. They were so bad. I mean, it's just pothole from pothole to pothole. My car, I had 12 years, I had to change the shocks 3 times because the roads are terrible. And he, in 2 years, got all these roads fixed, and my dealings with the government officials, when I turn in paperwork, I don't have to worry about paying bribes anymore because I can just pay the set government fee and get my things done. So, there's definite changes happening.
Amazing. Yeah, and I remember just chatting with you about bribery and what, you get stopped by police, you get this and that. Everyone's expecting a bribe. And, it's much more common in other countries than we're used to in America, where we still have issues. But in any case, there are more specifics we could get into. And I'll shoot a note back to this brother from Russia. He deserves to hear that and some of our email interaction. But we appreciate you there. We appreciate your heart. We appreciate your service. Can't wait for the door to open up for you to go back to a free Ukraine and keep ministering there. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So friends, if you want to support Leanne, she wasn't expecting me to mention this, go to fire-international.org. Leanne Peterson, you can stand with her ministering to needy, hurting people in Ukraine. And let's pray, God, your best for the people of Ukraine, the people of Russia, the people of Europe. In Jesus' name. Hey, friends, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, click on one of the boxes on the screen, check out another one of our videos, and be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a single video. We discovered that about 60% of you that are watching our videos aren't subscribers. So subscribe today. Doesn't cost you a dime. And if you want to support our work, Line of Fire, and all the things that we do, follow one of the links on the screen below.